We're going to open up with a word of prayer. So, yes, I have more here. Can you help pass those out, please? Thank you, sir.
There's some extras out on the front.
Okay. All right, let's open up with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for all that you do for us. Thank you for your grace and your mercy. Thank you for your love and your all that you've done for us. We thank you for your unspeakable gift on Calvary's cross. I pray, Lord, that you would help me to get through all the stuff we want to get through tonight. And I just ask and pray that everything that's said would be a blessing and be received with the spirit that it was intended. And we ask all these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. If you're tuning in online and you're looking that Bob looks and sounds funny, it's because I'm not Bob, I'm John. Nice to meet you. Open your Bibles up to 1 John chapter 2, verse 18, if you will. The last time I was here, I taught on the 21 types of Christ, and Bob asked me to cover this for him tonight, and I thought, what better way to follow up than with the 18 types of the Antichrist. If you don't have it, I printed off some packets to make it easier. You got the names and some of the verses and some of the stuff we're going to go over. If you don't have one, just like raise your hand or and hold it up until you get one, or until someone acknowledges you, or your hand gets tired and you just want to put it down. But look around. There's some on the table, some extra ones scattered around. So I thought it was interesting. I just kind of wanted to do a little overview real quick before we dive into the 18 types. But the word Antichrist, I thought it was interesting that it shows up 5 times in the Bible, 4 times in the book of 1 John, once in the book of 2 John, but you don't find it in the book of Revelation, which is, I thought that was kind of ironic. I would think, this is just me thinking, I would think in the book of Revelation they would mention the name, the Antichrist, but he's there, but he's not called the Antichrist. He has different names, which brings me to I wanted to go through a few of the names that you find him called. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 21, for instance, he's called a vile person. It says, in his estate shall stand up a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flattery. So you're going to want to get that verse down as far as one of the verses on the Antichrist. The second name, and it is not an exhaustive list. I just came up with as many I could think of off the top of my head. But the second name I got is that wicked. Sometimes it's called that wicked one, but specifically it didn't specifically say that wicked one. He says that wicked, and he capitalizes the word wicked, and that's in 2 Thessalonians 2:8. He says, then shall that wicked be revealed, when the Lord shall when the Lord shall consume with the Spirit, whom the Lord shall consume with the Spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And then the next verse, 2 Thessalonians 2:3, and these are not obviously in order. You got 2 of the names in the same verse. He's called the man of sin and the son of perdition. It says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Then the last one I want to look at is where he's called the beast, and that's going to be in Revelation 13:2. Specifically, verses 1 through 4 says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth was as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority, and I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So that's just a couple of verses that you're going to want to get down as far as dealing with the Antichrist. But before we dive into that, Bob's always talking about, you always got to establish a context. So if you're going to want to go over the Antichrist, you're going to need at least, just like going through the 21 types of Christ, which I don't think I did this when I did it, mainly because I thought it was unnecessary, and plus I had 21 names to get through. But I thought it would be important here to at least give you somewhat of an overview on the tribulation period. Very, very brief, obviously. This is, you can spend hundreds of hours studying out the tribulation period, and there's a lot of people out there that do it. But I thought probably the best place to lay it out would be going through what they call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's in Revelation chapter 6. And so I thought I would lay out these 4 guys, and these 4 horsemen, to me, lay out pretty much everything you're going to need, at least for a summary view of what you're going to need to know as far as the Antichrist. So the first one you come to is you come with a white horse. Now the Catholic Church taught all throughout the Dark Ages that the white horse, the white horse rider of Revelation 6 was the same white horse rider as Revelation 19, which is obviously Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge thing on this, but it's not. It's the Antichrist. Apparently, they didn't understand that there's a guy that's going to come in pretending to be Christ. That's why he's called the Antichrist. So that's what he is. And there's some differences about him. This is the first appearance of the Antichrist in the book of Revelation. If you compare the 2 men, the differences become very apparent. The man in Revelation 6, he has a bow and he has no arrows. While the man in Revelation, he's got a sword. There's a difference. You got to see that. The man in Revelation 6 has 1 crown. The man in Revelation 19 has many crowns. The man in Revelation chapter 6, he brings peace. But the man in Revelation 19, he brought the battle of Armageddon. So there is a difference between them. Down throughout the ages, the Bible believers taught that this white horse rider of Revelation 6 is the Antichrist, and it's very clear. And as we go through this, it'll become very apparent if it's not already. So, and tying this together with some of the other verses we just covered, you'll see how it all fits together. But this man comes in peaceably, and what he does is he establishes world peace. World peace is finally obtained. All the Miss Americas, they finally get their wish. They get world peace. So it's finally accomplished through the Antichrist. So he's given a crown, and he's given all the governments of the world, and he unifies the whole world under one kingdom, under one government, under one rule, and it's all under his power. And he obtains this kingdom through flattery. And the verses that go along with that would be Proverbs 20, verse 19, Proverbs 26, 28, Proverbs 29, 5, and as we've already read, Daniel 11, 21, and also verse 32. So when he does this, he brings some kind of a peace agreement, some kind of a covenant is established. And it involves Israel trading their land grant in exchange for peace and in exchange for rebuilding the temple. Now, right now, if you go over to Jerusalem and go over to what they call the Temple Mount, the place where you find where Solomon's temple was built, there's a Muslim mosque there called the Dome of the Rock. And the Muslims are not going to give that over to Israel. They're just not going to do it. I mean, if you think they are, you're just check out, I guess. Just go back to sleep. Because it's just not going to happen. You want to see World War III go up real quick, blow that mosque up or get rid of that mosque or tell them we're going to take it by force. It's going to be World War III in a heartbeat. Matter of fact, you can go through, you find it in, I think I saw it under Wikipedia, but it's out there on many sources. There's a bunch of nuts in the middle of the 80s, I want to say 84, where some nutcase group, they decided they were going to go and blow up the mosque, and they were going to, some people said they wanted to trigger the rapture. I don't know if that's true or not. They look like they were some kind of a extremist group. So I think they were just maybe stirring up trouble. But they went in there with a bunch of hand grenades, a bunch of TNT, and they were going to blow up the mosque. And the Israeli police stopped them and arrested them. And obviously, for obvious reasons, because the Jews would have been blamed for it, they wouldn't have shed any tears over that mosque being blown up. But they also didn't want all the trouble that would have come with it. So that's that white horse rider. He comes in, he establishes peace. And you know that by the next rider that shows up, the red horse, the rider on a red horse. It says it was given to him to take peace from the earth. That shows you right there that this white horse rider had established peace on earth. So it's like a false millennial reign of Christ. It's a false millennium which only lasts 3.5 years. And he comes in and he takes peace from the earth. So briefly, there's a lot of I'm not going to give you. I'll give you some of the verses that go with it, but it's a big study to go through all this. But briefly, in the middle of the tribulation period, there's going to be. And the Bible's not super clear on it. It's vague on it. But here's what you got. There's going to be some kind of an assassination attempt of some sort where the Antichrist is going to die by a head wound. And you find that over in Revelation 13:3. It says he saw that one of his heads were wounded to death. And then after 3 days, he's going to rise from the dead. It's a false resurrection, just like Christ. And at that point, Satan enters into him. He is going to walk into the rebuilt temple. He's going to walk into the Holy of Holies. And he's going to sit down on that mercy seat and declare that he is God manifest in the flesh, that he is the Messiah. He is Jesus Christ, basically. And he's going to declare that he is God. And you find that in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-10. Now, in Daniel 9:27, this is called the abomination of desolations, or the abomination that maketh desolate. And when this happens, this is the signal, this is the thing that starts what is called, amongst Bible believers, the Great Tribulation. And this is the point where all the plagues are going to be dumped down on the earth. Basically, from that point on, once he does that, he defiles that temple and he sits down, he declares he's God. From that point on, you have the world is going to be turned into hell. All the vials, all the plagues, all the problems, everything that's going with that you find in the book of Revelation, this earth gets turned into hell in the next 3.5 years. Not from that point anyway. So that's the red horse. Then you have a black horse rider that shows up. Now somewhere after the middle of the tribulation period, Revelation 13:18, you're going to find that the world is required to take the mark of the beast. In order for them to buy, in order for them to sell something or buy something, I mean, you know, everyone's worried now about, like, you know, if I got to, am I going to have to take this vaccine to keep my job? Let me tell you something. At this point in here, if you want to keep your job, if you want to buy and sell, if you want to be able to eat, you're going to have to take the mark of the beast, which is way, way farther than that, much worse than that. And this is why, for this reason right here, you'll see there's places in the Bible where it'll be talking about the wickedness of rich people. And you'll see, you find it over in James, you find it over there in the book of Job, you find it in Proverbs, you'll find it where the Bible refers to them because they're rich, they're automatically, God assumes that they're evil, that they're wicked. And then he finds some people that are poor, and because they're poor, they're righteous, they're good. And you're like, well, I've met some poor people that were just as wicked as any person I've ever met, and then I found some rich people that are just as wicked as anyone. So, or I found some rich people that are actually good people. So what's the difference? Well, in this age, that doesn't apply. But there's coming a time, if you take the mark of the beast, you're going to be rich. And if you don't, you're going to be poverty-stricken. You're going to be starving to death in the tribulation period. And that's what those, doctrinally, that's what those are a reference to. So with this black horse rider, it comes a world famine. And it's going to be caused by a worldwide drought. Now, along with this, during this time, you're going to find two witnesses showing up. And there's going to be Moses and Elijah. You find them over there listed, named in Matthew chapter 17. And Elijah, what's he known for? Well, actually first, Moses, what's he known for? Moses is the guy that back in the book of Exodus that unleashed 13 plagues down there in Egypt when he was dealing with Pharaoh. And then Elijah, he's the guy that was dealing with Ahab back in the book of 1 Kings 17 and 18. He goes into Ahab and says, hey, just want to let you know, thus saith the Lord, you ain't going to get no rain. It ain't going to be rain until I say so. Bye. He walks out. Every head bowed, every eye closed. That was it. And, he didn't think anything of it. He said, well, who's that nut? I think that's Elijah. Man, I don't care what he has to say. Well, after a couple weeks, no rain. After a couple months, no rain. After a couple years, no rain. And suddenly, he's the most wanted man on the planet. Now, we got to find this guy, and he needs to pray for rain. And they're looking all over the place. You go back and read the account in 1 Kings 17 and 18, it'll explain that Ahab was going all over the world trying to find this guy, trying to find Elijah because, look, hey, we got to get some rain because without the rain is a drought. With a drought, what happens? Everyone's starving to death. There's no food. Couldn't grow food. So with that comes this black horse rider, which brings in a famine and all that. Last one you find is the pale horse rider. Obviously, I know this is an oversimplification in all this. These are big studies, and this would probably take you could literally spend a Bible study on each one of these horsemen. But for time's sake, we're not going to go through all that. That's not our purpose here tonight. But this pale horse rider, he gathers together all the world's armies into one final fight one final fight to the finish, called the Battle of Armageddon in the second coming of Christ. And he gathers together a 200 million man army. That's a 200 men, that wasn't a big army. 200 million man army. That's a big army. That's massive. And matter of fact, it says that there are 200 million horsemen. And I figured it up one time, how much blood you find in a horse, and then how much blood you find in a human body, and you do all the math, you end up with a puddle of blood. When they get slaughtered at the Battle of Armageddon, there's enough blood there. The Bible says it comes up to the horse bridles. There's enough blood where you could float the Queen Mary in that thing. It's enough blood to cover, 200 miles wide and 5 feet deep. That's a lot of blood. That's a mess of blood right there. I don't remember how many gallons it was off the top of my head, but it's a mess. So that's the Battle of Armageddon, and that's the four horsemen. So having gone through that, let's start in with the 18 types of the Antichrist, and this is where you're going to want to look at your packet. In Genesis chapter 4, you have the first type of the Antichrist is going to be Cain. And Cain promotes the first false religion in the Bible. No, I take that back. Second false religion in the Bible. I forgot about Adam and Eve and their little apron thing. So the second false religion in the Bible is going to be works for salvation. he gets out there and he's offering up his little fruit stand. He gets up there and says, well, I know that the blood is from the lamb, and God requires the blood of a lamb, but I think my works are pretty good. I worked a whole lot harder than Abel did, and I was out there. I was up before he was, and I went to bed after he went to bed, and I worked my butt off, and I got all this, and look at all that I did. I got all these fruit. I'm offering up the very best that I had, the best of my works. Here it is. And God looked at it and said, Cain, don't you know you can't get blood from a turnip? That's what that saying comes from. That story right there. So, works for salvation. People still practice it today. They don't offer up, corn and turnips and watermelon and whatever, but they offer up works all the time. They think, for some reason, they got this idea that, hey, I think my works will do. I don't think I'm that bad. I'm not too bad. And they miss the fact that in order for your works to save you, you have to be as good as Jesus Christ. And if you think you're as good as Jesus Christ, just check out, because you're out in fantasy world if you think you're as good as Jesus Christ, because you're not. No one is. So when his offering isn't accepted, he gets a little attitude. He has a problem with that. He's not happy about that. So what does he do? Well, he gets together with his brother and they sing Kumbaya and they just have a good hug and a cry and go on their way, right? No, that's not Cain. Cain decides to try and justify himself like any wicked person would, like any self-righteous person would. They try and what? They try and justify themselves. You'll see these characteristics. It's human nature. We see it in ourselves. We see it in other people. He tries to justify himself. And when Abel wouldn't do it, you read the thing and it just says, all it says is that Cain rose up against his brother. But here's what you do is the types are all there through the Bible. There's always a good guy and a bad guy, and the bad guy is always trying to justify himself. And when the good guy won't justify him, he decides, then you got to go. And he raises up and tries to kill him. And in this case, he does kill him. He murders his own brother. Why? Because he wouldn't accept his way. Then he decides, well, here's what I need to do. I'm going to go off and I'm going to build a city. The first city in the Bible is built by Cain. Now that's a picture doctrinally pointing ahead to the Antichrist, who's going to also build a city called Babylon, Mr. Religion. He builds a city. And he promotes in this city, you know what he promotes? He promotes the acceptance of his way. In his city, he's allowed to worship the way Cain thinks ought to be worshiped. He worships in his form of worship. He produces a line which ends up with polygamy, multiple wives. He ends up with herds of cattle where you get the bulls, and that points to the Baal worship that's coming soon. He ends up with religious music using harps and organs. He ends up with idols made from brass and iron. And he ends up with the worship of a female deity. All in Genesis chapter 4. This is the origin of every false religion in the Bible. And it all starts with Cain. Now, another point I'll throw in here. Cain's name means an iron spear. Now, that leads some people to guess, and you can't be positive about it. The Bible doesn't tell you. But people want to speculate that perhaps he murdered Abel with an iron spear. You don't know. But I do know that Abel, if you remember, is one of the types of Christ. And when Jesus Christ died on the cross, where did that fifth wound come from? A spear. Now, I don't know if it was an iron spear. Now, in history, this is called the spear of destiny. And this is a big, long study where sometimes it's called the spear of Guinness, I guess how you pronounce his name. It was supposedly the soldier that pierced Christ's side. Supposedly his name was Guinness. It's because later on they found one of the spearheads that they brought back from the Crusades and said, look, it says Guinness. That must have been that soldier's name. Which, whatever, they're that dumb. And you go through Europe, you do a little study on it, you'll find out there's like 4 or 5 of those things floating around Europe to this day. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. They kept bringing them back. Oh, look, I found this. You know, it was like they found the bones of a pig. You know, and they said, these were the pigs that we went down where the pigs ran into the ocean, the swine, and here's some of the pig bones. And this is all the junk they brought back from the Crusades. And there's enough like pieces of the cross all over Europe to build Fort Apache. I mean, it's just all kinds of stuff. It almost makes you think that maybe some of them might have been lying. Just a thought. Hitler is probably he's one of the most prominent people that went a hold of it. But when he was a boy, he saw over in Vienna, in Austria, where he grew up, they had one of these spearheads that were there, or this spear of destiny. And as soon as he took over as chancellor and united Germany and Austria, he went over there and stole that sucker. He went over there and busted into that museum and took it. And supposedly, and this is all kind of a side note, but supposedly that whoever held this spear in battle couldn't be defeated. And there were a number of people that held it. Constantine supposedly held it. There was a guy named Alaric. He was a Visigoth king that sacked Rome in 410. Charles Martel, who was a Frankish general in 700 AD. Charlemagne had it. He was a Frankish king. Frederick the First, king of Germany, he held it. And supposedly they had this thing, and they were supposedly undefeated in battle until something happened, they lost it, or they misplaced it, or whatever happened, someone stole it, and as soon as they lost it, they were defeated in battle. I never checked it out. I don't know how accurate it is. I don't know how it seems like there's a lot of superstition in it, personally, in my opinion. But it's still an interesting study to look at. So that brings us to the next guy. Genesis chapter 10, we have a guy by the name of Nimrod. He's the first Gentile king. And if you remember the story of Babylon, they get out there and they're building a city. They get together. And God says, now look, you need to spread out and you need to populate the earth. You got to spread out. And they said, well, what if we do the opposite of what God says, which never works out. Let's just write that one down. If you don't have that written down somewhere in your Bible, write that down. When you do the opposite of what God says, it never works out. Just as a general rule, just keep that in the back of your mind somewhere. And they decide, instead of spreading out, what if we gathered together and build a big city? They're always wanting to build a city. Isn't that interesting? Why do they want to do that? It's pointing ahead to a day when they'll finally get that, the Antichrist will get together and say, finally, we have world peace, thanks to all the women that have been praying for it from the beauty queen, Miss America, thank you. And now we can finally build that city we've been wanting to build. So they get together and they start building this, and God said, I told you to spread out, so you guys don't want to do it, so here's what we're going to do. One day the guy sat there and he's sitting there and he's hammering something in, or he's building something, and he says, hey, hand me some more nails. And that comes out of his mouth, and suddenly at one point they're all of one language, and they're all together, everyone's united. But at this point, right in the middle of that, God said, you're going to speak German, you're going to speak Russian, you're going to speak Yugoslavian, you're going to speak Ethiopian with the clicking sound, you're going to speak this, you're going to speak French, you're going to speak English, and boom, suddenly they're trying to talk to each other, and they're like, what did you say? Man, you sound like you're babbling, man. You just mumble. What did you say? And suddenly nobody can understand each other because God just divided the language. And suddenly they said, well, let's see, where do Germans live? Well, I think it's over in Europe. Let's go that way. And then the other guy said, well, where do the Ethiopians live? I think it's down here. Let's go down there with all the flies. And they go all over the place. They spread out. So God gets his way. He always gets his way. But during this time, they continue to build the city, and that city, Babel, becomes Babylon, and Nimrod, he unifies the world and becomes the first king. And when He's called Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, the phrase before the Lord implies not that he's just doing it and saying, I'm doing this for the Lord. It's not for the Lord, it's before the Lord, which means he's doing it in the sight of God. And the implication is that he's doing this, he's doing what God doesn't want done, and he's doing it in God's sight. He's doing it in rebellion. Matter of fact, the name Nimrod means rebel. So he's doing all this in rebellion against God. And that phrase hunter seems to imply that he's not hunting animals. He's not on safari. He's hunting people. He's hunting down whoever is against his way. He's taken that and following with the type, you're going to see this more and more. Where we saw it with Cain. You disagree with Cain's way, you get the spear. So that brings us to the third guy. We have, and we've already mentioned him, over there in Exodus, chapters 4 through 12, you have a guy by the name of Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh's not necessarily a name, it's a title, because you see like everyone, either that or everyone's just named Pharaoh. All the kings seem to be named Pharaoh. The implication is that the title means that it's the title for the king of Egypt. The word Pharaoh means crocodile. I don't know how that connects to anything, but there it is. I didn't know they had crocodiles in Egypt, but do they? I've never been to Egypt, but I'll have to watch something. I'll have to do some studying on crocodiles, but anyway. He spends his time persecuting the nation of Israel. Right before they're getting ready to flee into the wilderness, and you can connect that to Revelation chapter 12, verses 6 through 13. All the tribulation plagues, they are performed before Pharaoh by two witnesses, Moses and, at this point, it's his brother Aaron. And you want to see that? That's over there, that connects to Revelation 11:6. Now, he tries to stop Israel from fleeing into the wilderness. He tries to get them to stay in Egypt. And he uses sorcery, he uses magicians to falsely replicate the hand of God. You're going to want to see that. That's part of the Antichrist's game. And at the very end, after he's let Moses go and he said, you go ahead and go, just get out of here now. Well, then after they go, he goes, man, what did I just do? We just let them go. Why did I do that? Let's go get them. Get the army together. And they get his whole army. They pursue after them, and Moses divides the Red Sea. They go down through the Red Sea, and Pharaoh says, hey, if they can do it, we can do it. They go down in after them. About halfway through, the lug nuts fall off their chariots, and suddenly they're stuck, literally. And God said, okay, it's about morning time. Let's close this little thing up, and we're going to, boom, comes back together, and they all drown in the sea. There's Pharaoh. So he's the type of the Antichrist. Number 4, over there in Numbers chapter 22, 23, and 24, we find a man by the name of Balak. He's the king of, he's a king. I don't remember what country he's from. Syria? I actually don't remember off the top of my head. But he's a king anyway. But he hires a false prophet named Balaam to curse Israel. And you find in Numbers 22, maybe 24, I forget which, but he worships Baal, the sun god. He is an enemy of God. He's an enemy of Israel. He uses witchcraft to find God's people and destroy them. And his name, Balak, means destroyer. For the New Testament reference, connecting him to the Antichrist, along with all the other stuff, see Revelation 9:11. Then you find the man Sisera. This is over there in Judges chapter 4. Sisera is the leader. He's the captain of a very powerful army. He leads this army against Israel, which mightily oppresses Israel for years. And Sisera hears that Barak is on Mount Tabor over there, and this is Judges 4:12. And you read down through there and think, okay, what does that mean? Who cares? What's Tabor? What does that mean? Is that any significance? You know where Mount Tabor is? Mount Tabor, historically, is where the Mount of Transfiguration took place over in Matthew 17. Remember it says he went up into a mountain and he was transfigured before them? That's Mount Tabor. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but historically it's been accepted that that's where it was. You know what that Mount of Transfiguration is? That's a picture of the second coming of Christ. So he's over here, and he's heading to a battle on a mountain where a picture of the second coming of Christ takes place. Who would that be? He is a picture of the Antichrist. It's a picture of the second coming of Christ, and this whole battle turns into a picture of the Battle of Armageddon. And he ends up fleeing away from the battle, and he dies by a head wound. You're going to see a number of these guys die by a head wound at the hand of a woman. And the name Sisera means field of battle. Number 6, you find a guy by the name of Abimelech. Now Abimelech is a guy that he murders his brethren. He slays his brethren because they were a better choice for king than he was. Nice guy. He wanted to eliminate the competition. He literally blew away the competition, so to speak. And in Judges 9, 15, and 16, Abimelech is likened to a bramble bush. Remember that story about the 4 trees? And they go about to elect a king, and the vine says one thing, and the olive tree says something else, and whatever the third tree was, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then, which one? Fig tree, thank you. The fig tree said something else, and then the bramble stepped forth and said, I'm going to be king. And the bramble tree with no fruit on it says, I'll be king. And then he stops and says, and he tells you, like, here's why I'm telling this story. He wiped out the other trees so that the bramble bush could be the new king. And you elected this guy as your king, and you made him your head, and he's in charge, and you put him up. But here's the problem. He's the bramble bush. The bramble bush, where'd the bramble bush come from? Thorns and thistles shall the earth bring forth unto you. That's the curse of the earth back there in Genesis 3. The bramble bush is a result of the curse that God put on the ground. And you find him dying by a head wound, again, at the hand of a woman. He gets over there and he's charging in. He wants to, I think it was a mill or something. This woman says, let's drop something down on him. Oh, here's a big rock. Let's throw this down on him. A big old rock drops down on him and likes to kill him. And they end up, I think he's also one of the suicides. He says, I ain't going to make it through this. And he dropped a gigantic, sledgehammer on his head, and she ends up dying. His name means father of the king. That's number 6. Number 7, now we're about into the middle of the Bible, we find a man by the name of Saul. His story is going to be found in 1 Samuel 9 through 30, through the end of the book, through 31. He is Israel's first king. Now he's the people's choice. The people's choice always in the Bible always precedes God's choice. You always want to wait for God's choice. You have your choice, people's choice, or you have God's choice. You always want to wait for God's choice. But they didn't want to wait for God's choice. They didn't want God's choice. They wanted the people's choice, and they got Saul. Now, Saul is against God's man, David, and he hunts him down to try and destroy him in the wilderness. Picture the tribulation Jews, 1 Samuel 24:14, 1 Samuel 26, verse 20. That's where David's out there, and he says, you're hunting my soul to kill me. You're hunting after a flea. You're hunting after a partridge in the wilderness. And it's interesting he uses those analogies because there's a picture of in the tribulation Jews, they're going to be hunted down. They're going to flee into the wilderness in Revelation 12:6 and be hiding and running and ducking and hiding and trying to stay one step ahead of the Antichrist, because he's going to be doing a global hunt, trying to hunt down every Jew he can find and kill them. And you find that Saul, he defiles the sacrifice. That's a picture of the abomination of desolation. He uses sorcery. He goes to the witch at Endor. In 1 Samuel 10:23, it says that Saul is head and shoulders above the tallest man in Israel, in so many words. Head and shoulders above. That means if there was a 6-foot tall guy in Israel, he is head and shoulders above that. So he is at least 7 feet tall. That's what's surprising, that when it came to fighting Goliath, later we'll find a couple of stories later, wouldn't you think the guy that's 7 feet tall would want to say, he's a little bit, he's taller than me, but hey, he's the best shot at it. But see, he was a 7-foot tall guy with 2 feet of courage. He was a little midget when it came to courage. So he didn't go down there. And his name, the name Saul, means asked for or desired. That's that people's choice. Now, what you find through this study, if you want to study out do a character study on Saul, you find that Saul's hunt for David led David to write many of the Psalms that you're going to find the Jews, they're going to be praying back to God during the tribulation period. You find them all through the Psalms. Saul is going to be one of the greatest types of the Antichrist in the Bible. Which brings us to number 8, Goliath. You find him popping up in 1 Samuel 17. Goliath is he's a remnant of the giants that came up after the flood. And you find over there in Genesis 6, it says that the sons of God left their first estate, and they left their first estate here, but then it says, and also after that. And this is Goliath is part of that group that's after the flood. Someplace in there, and he's part of that group. He leads the army against Israel to destroy him, and he's up on one mountain, and the other, Israel is up on one mountain, the Philistines are up on the other mountain, and he comes down in the middle, and he's saying, come on down and fight me. Come on down. And that's a picture of the Battle of Armageddon. He dies, again, you find him dying by a head wound from the hand of David. The name Goliath means exile. Then you have number 9, Nabal. Nabal is in 1 Samuel 25, and he's going to be probably, in my opinion, probably the weakest type in the list, but he's still there. He's still a type. But he's one of the weakest types in the list. He's a very strong type of somebody that takes the mark of the beast and has become rich because of it. You find him that he's very rich, but he's very wicked, and it says that he's one of the sons of Belial. I guess they say that name. Also, he refuses to help David. His attitude is, hey, you want riches? You go take the mark of the beast in type. But he refuses to help him out. In 1 Samuel 25:38, it says that God killed Nabal. So he's killed by God. It's a picture of the Antichrist. He is killed by the hand of God. And we find a picture of this where David wasn't allowed to kill Saul. There was a place where he was about to kill Saul. He was hiding in a cave, and Saul came in, and he sneaks up behind him, and he cuts off a piece of his robe, and he's going to kill him. And he goes, about that time, God said, no, don't you dare touch him. That's the Lord's anointed. You don't do that. He's doing what I told him to do. So he won't let him kill him. He's going to be killed by God. God's going to kill him. So there's a picture of that there. And in verse 39, it says that the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. Thank you. Appreciate it. Which is an interesting way to put it. Thank you, Ram. He returned his wickedness upon his own head. Now, there's several different ways you could have said that. You reap what you sow, which is what happened. But why did he say it that way? He returned his wickedness upon his own head. That's a fulfillment of a prophecy that hasn't taken place yet. It's going to take place. It's a prophecy found in Genesis 3:15. It says, "It shall bruise thy head," and speaking of God's seed, "and thou shalt bruise his heel." That is, the Lord is going to land on the head of the Antichrist so hard that he's going to bruise his heel. That's the second coming of Christ. He's going to come down on top of him, and he's going to land on him with all 4 feet. Not that he has 4 feet, but that's an expression. Nabal means fool. Then you have number 10, you have Absalom. Absalom is found in 2 Samuel 14. He's got a sister named Tamar, and she is raped by their stepbrother Amnon. Both of these are sons of David. And for some reason, David doesn't deal with it. He's angry about it, but he doesn't do anything about it. And I'm going to speculate. I don't like speculating, but I'm going to speculate. I'm going to guess that because of everything that had just gone on in chapters 12 and 13, his adultery, his murder to cover it up, and then God pardoning him and giving him the sure mercies of David, I'm going to guess had something to do with it. But here's what happened. David has become indecisive. And as king, you can't be indecisive. You know, we learned in leadership, you can't be indecisive, I think. I don't know if you use that specific word, but it's there. I mean, there's things that you have to deal with as a leader. If you're going to be a leader, you can't be indecisive. You got to make a decision. Good, bad, or indifferent, do something. But because of this, he's angry about it, but he doesn't deal with it. And because of this, after waiting for 2 years, Absalom, he finally usurps the established law, and he takes matters into his own hands, and he kills Amnon. He kills his brother Amnon. Now, it turns out that is what needed to be done, but because you find over there in 2 Samuel 13:39 that David was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. So he said, okay, that was what needed to be done. But for some reason, obviously, he would have had to murder his own son, have his own son be put to death. You know, that's rough. I'm not going to say that's easy to do. I couldn't do that. I mean, that's just, how do you do that? But in the end, it was what needed to be done. And Absalom said, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. And he does it. So then, at that point, Absalom gets his brain going, and suddenly in chapter 14, he returns to the land. Well, first he flees the country. Well, then later on, Joab said, look, you know what, let's bring him back, you know. Let's let bygones be bygones. Let's just let the past stay in the past, and let's just move forward. And he brings him back, brings him in before the king, and everything's good. They hug it out, and they go on. Everything's fine. But everything's not fine with Absalom. Absalom has decided somewhere along the way that Israel needs a new leader, a new and improved leader, and he thinks, in his humble opinion, that it should be him. Nice, humble guy. And here's a couple of things. I think I got 6 or 7 things that he decides to do. It's found in chapter 14, 2 Samuel 14. First of all, he pretends to be the leader when he isn't. He's a self-proclaimed leader. He didn't prove himself as a leader. He's a self-proclaimed leader. Secondly, he sabotages the leadership from behind the scenes. Don't you love backstabbers? People that talk about you behind your back. They don't have the guts to say anything to your face. They'll always talk about you behind your back. They're real bold and brave behind you, behind the scenes, in closed doors, in little, over the internet or wherever. But when it comes face to face, suddenly they're your best buddy. Oh, no. Oh, you're taking that wrong. That's not how I meant that. Yeah, sure. So he sabotages the leadership from behind the scenes, never face to face, always from behind the scenes. Number 3, he seeks out people that have complaints or grievances. You want to stir up a rebellion? What do? You find people that have a problem with the current leadership. And suddenly, birds of a feather flock together. Let's start joining them. Let's join forces. So he seeks out all these people that have complaints, and he starts telling them, number 4, he sides with the complainers against the current leadership. He gets in there with them and says, you know what, you got a problem? Oh, look, I think it would be, you have a very legitimate gripe, you have a very legitimate grievance, but here's the problem. The king doesn't have anyone right now that can deal with your problem. If I were in charge, things would be different. Sure they would. It'd be worse. Just write it down. It would be worse. He sides with the complainers against the current leadership. And then 5, he complains that he could do a better job, which we already went over, than the current king. And then number 6, he steals the hearts of the people with gestures of love. He doesn't really love them. He just pretends to love them. And then number 7, he conspires to dethrone David and establish his own throne. And the Bible specifically uses the word in 2 Samuel 14, conspiracy. It's a legitimate Bible conspiracy. He is conspiring behind the scenes to overthrow David's government. Overthrow David's kingdom, overthrow God's kingdom, which is what the Antichrist is all about. In 2 Samuel 18, when he finally ends up in battle, you find that he was part of the hippie movement. He had real long hair, and his hair, it says, became his hang-up because he rode under a tree and his hair got caught in the tree, and suddenly the Bible says the mule walked on, not in those exact words, but there's actually this old sermon called The Mule Walked On. And he ended up left hanging up in the tree. And it says, back to 14, in 14:25, it says he was praised for his beauty. You know what the Bible says in Ezekiel 28:12? That the devil was perfect in beauty before he fell. So his beauty is his hang-up. His hair was his hang-up. And his hang-up, made him a curse because Galatians 3:13 says, cursed is every man that hangeth on a tree. His hair got caught up in a tree and he's hanging from a tree and now he's a curse. In 2 Samuel 18:17 it says that he was cast into a great pit. Well, who's that? That's the Antichrist. At the second coming of Christ, the Antichrist is taken and cast into a great pit, into the bottomless pit. Lastly, in 2 Samuel 18:18, it says that he set up a pillar and called it Absalom's place. And it's interesting that he used the word Absalom's place because in the New Testament, we see probably the greatest type of the Antichrist is going to be a guy we'll see later, Judas. And it says when Judas died, he went to his own place. Interesting. See why you don't change the words in the Bible? You change the words, they could have easily said, well, he died and went to hell. They'd be right, but you'd miss the reference. That's why you don't change the words. The name Absalom means father of peace. That brings us to a guy that we talked about last time, Solomon, in 1 Kings 10:14. When we went over the 21 types of Christ, I pointed out that Solomon was on both lists. As a type of Christ, he's a type of the millennial reign of Christ. But as a type of the Antichrist, he's a picture of the false peace that the Antichrist does. He rebuilds the temple. And in 1 Kings 10:14 through 28, you see him in there. He gets a bunch of gold comes in every year. So many talents of gold, 400 something. So many every year. He's getting a bunch of golds coming in by ships. And then one year it says the amount of gold that came in was 666 talents of gold. That's an interesting note. Why would he put that? Because it's funny, if you go back and read the verse, it says 666 talents of gold besides this and this and this. So technically it was either more or apparently it was more than 666 talents, but God specifically wanted to point out 666. I want that right here. I want you to see that the number 666 is going to occur right here. And then read what happens after that in the chapter. He starts secretly preparing for war. You go back and look at it, he starts arming his troops. He starts purchasing horses. He starts building up armory. He's building shields. He's making weapons. He's doing all. What's that about? If he's in a time of peace, why is he suddenly preparing for war? Because he's got an agenda. And the name Solomon means peace. So this is a time of peace. The next guy we see, number 12, is Jeroboam. Now Jeroboam, you find him in 1 Kings 12, 20 through 28. And Jeroboam, he takes the majority of the nation of Israel and he sets up 2 false idols, golden calves. He sets up in 2 different cities. And he sets them up to worship instead of the God of Israel. And what Jeroboam does is what he did was create a multi-generational sin, which damned generation after generation after generation, and it lasts for about 280 years until the 10 northern tribes were carried away into captivity by the king of Assyria. Now after each king, you go back and read it. After Jeroboam, study each king. Go and look what it says. Go and look at the name Jeroboam, and it says, well, they couldn't do what was right because he followed the way of Jeroboam. And this guy couldn't, the next king, well, he couldn't do what's right because he followed the sins of Jeroboam. And this guy, he couldn't recover from it because they kept following, and the farther it got, the more ingrained it got, and it got to the place where they couldn't fix it because he had established a multi-generational sin. Now, I'll just give you, here's a little practical thing. What you don't want is to pass on sin to your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You want to fix the sin in your life. That's just a little side note. But because whatever you don't fix in your life, you pass on to your children. Whatever you don't fix in your life and their life, you pass on to your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cycle keeps going until somebody decides, hey, this stops here. I'm tired of this sin destroying my family. From grandfather to father to you to children to grandchildren to great-grandchildren. Somewhere in there, if you want to stop a multi-generational sin, whatever it is, someone has got to take responsibility and say, it stops here. It stops today. You say, well, I can't stop it today. Then stop it tomorrow. But start today, preparing for tomorrow. But stop it as soon as you can because it's not going to get any better. So you're just going to keep getting worse. That has nothing to do with this, but I thought I'd throw that in there. 1 Kings 13:4 says, it says that God sent a prophet up to prophesy against those golden calves. And he's got an altar up there. And when he gets up there, this guy, he preaches against the altar. And when he does that, the altar falls apart and the ashes go everywhere. And when he does that, Jeroboam reaches out with his hand. Doesn't say which hand. I'm going to guess it's his right hand. And he reaches out and says, get that guy out of here. When he does that, his hand dries up. His arm dries up. And now he goes back and says, ask the guy to pray for his arm and pray for him, and he ends up, apparently his arm recovers. But that's a picture of something that's going to happen. You find over there in Zechariah 11:17, which is another verse you can throw in on the Antichrist. It says that the Antichrist has a bad right eye and a bad right arm. Matter of fact, the specific words, it says the Antichrist's arm shall be clean dried up. See, those specific words, it lines it right up. Jeroboam, his name means whose people are many, because he got the 10 northern tribes. And here's a general rule. God's crowd is never the majority. God's crowd never looks like they're winning until they win. But they never look like they're winning. God's crowd always looks like everything's stacked against them. It looks like all the time. It looks like we're just getting killed and slaughtered. And I mean, Jesus Christ, all through his ministry, this is Jesus Christ who did it perfect. It looked like he had a little handful of followers following him around, and it looked like he was losing. The people with all the power, the scribes and the Pharisees, they were always trying to fight him and trying to hunt him down. He was always having to duck this way and go this way and avoid them and do this, and then he'd get out there and preach against them, and they'd say, hey, isn't this the guy we're looking for? No, that's not him. That's got to be a different guy. He wouldn't come out here and boldly preach right here. Wouldn't it? That is him. Then he'd disappear. But God's people never look like, God's never in the majority. God always has that faithful remnant. He's got the 2 southern tribes, that faithful remnant for a time. Number 13, we have Ahab. And this guy he is up there. You find 1 Kings 16:29 through 1 Kings 22:40. You find the dynamic duo of Ahab and Jezebel, which matches the Antichrist and his bride, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. In Proverbs, you'll find them called the evil man in 2:12 and the strange woman in 2:16. But he's a perfect type of this. Matter of fact, and we talked about this earlier, this is where God raises up Elijah, one of the 2 witnesses in Revelation 11:3-6, to preach against him. And during his reign, Elijah shuts up the heaven for 3.5 years. And you compare 1 Kings 17:1, 18:1, and James chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, and you'll see that heaven gets shut up for 3.5 years. And the name Ahab means brother of his father, which may shed a little bit of light on Psalms 109:14. I'm not really sure about that, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. Brother of his father. It's a weird name. But he's a perfect picture of Ahab and Jezebel. Number 14, we find Sennacherib. 2 Kings 19, 16 through 37. This is where God raises up Sennacherib and his army his job is to carry away the 10 northern tribes into captivity. They haven't been doing what was right. That multi-generational sin has been going on for years and years and years, generation after generation after generation, putting their faith in the words of Jeroboam, putting their faith in the doctrines of Jeroboam, the sins of Jeroboam, and taking those things straight to hell, because that multi-generational sin was affecting each generation, and the devil was just knocking them down like blocks on on top of a roof going down 80 miles an hour down the highway. They were just flying off into hell. Those 10 northern tribes now, God's finally had it with them, and he says, here's what's going to happen. We're going to carry them away into captivity. So he raises up this nation of Assyria and gives them a massive army of 185,000 troops, and Sennacherib is in charge of them. And he comes in with this, probably the greatest army the world's ever seen, destroying anyone in their path. Any army that comes up against them, they get wiped out. And that's why you find over there, this is a perfect picture of Revelation 13:4, where it says, who is able to make war with him? Speaking of the Antichrist. Nobody can defeat him in battle. Who is able to make war with him? If you want to put a little reference down, it's called Jesus Christ. Put that down there next to Revelation 13:4. Jesus Christ is able to make war with them. That's ahead of the story. When Sennacherib comes to Sennacherib, he decides that, hey, I've got the greatest army in the world. Why don't I add Jerusalem to my conquest? And in his pride, he goes up there and he blasphemes the Lord and he blasphemes God's people. And at first, in 2 Kings 19, he sends a guy named Rabshakeh to blaspheme the Lord in his name. And in chapter 20, he hears a rumor that Ethiopia is attacking while he's gone away. So he's got to stop attacking Jerusalem. He's surrounding Jerusalem. He goes, oh, dang it, we got to go deal with the Ethiopians. He goes down there. And while he's away, he said, I don't want them to start thinking that, hey, their God helped them out, so I'm going to send them a letter. He sends them a letter where he blasphemes God. He blasphemes the God of the Bible. He blasphemes everything to do with God and the Bible. And in Revelation 13, 5 and 6, it says, there was given unto him, the Antichrist, a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. He's a type of the Antichrist. Number 15, we have Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel chapter 3, I'm giving you a lot of it, just the highlights. I can't go through and find every single place. We'd be here all night. But in Nebuchadnezzar, he sets up a golden image, and he forces the whole world to worship this image, a one-world religion. And this is exactly what's going to happen with the Antichrist. In Revelation 13, 14, it says that the Antichrist sets up an image, and they make an image to the beast. It's going to look like the Antichrist, which had the sword, which had the wound by a sword and did live. So in Daniel 3:5, so they set up an image, and you're required to worship not only the Antichrist, but the image of the Antichrist. And that's what you got the picture of in Daniel chapter 3, is he's setting up a one-world religion with his image, this image of gold that he sets up, that the world is required to sacrifice, to worship. I want to throw this in. I thought this was interesting. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 5, and Daniel chapter 10, Daniel 3:5, 3:10, and 3:15, you find that music is played to announce the times of worship. And in these 3 verses, he mentions 6 instruments. And he mentions 6 instruments 3 times. 6, 6, 6. Just tucked away in there. I just thought that was interesting. I thought I'd throw that in there. Now, the name Nebuchadnezzar means Nebo protects the crown, which Nebo is one of his false idols. Number 16, we have Haman. You find him over there in the book of Esther. Now, the order of the books here, they show where we are right now on God's timetable. Pardon me. In Ezra, you find the Jews returning to the Promised Land. Pardon me. That, in modern times, this took place in 1918 under the Balfour Declaration. In the book of Nehemiah, you find the Jews rebuilding. This took place in 1948 when Israel became a nation again. Then in the book of Esther, we find a Gentile queen being replaced by a Jewish queen. That's going to be a picture of the rapture that's going to take place, Lord willing, tonight. But any time now, any moment now. And then, what happens after this? A man by the name Haman arrives on the scene. He is a picture of the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. Haman. This man, Haman, Haman is a guy who is, he gets exalted and magnified, just like the Antichrist, where all the world is worshiping the Antichrist. All the people of this kingdom are all now bowing down and reverencing Haman. But there shows up a guy by the name of Mordecai, and he refuses to bow, and he refuses to reverence Haman. And when he does that, Haman is filled with wrath. He's so angry that he decides, not only am I going to kill Mordecai, but I'm going to kill anyone connected with him. And he decides to destroy every Jew on the planet. So what happens? Haman is called the Jews' enemy in 3:10. Haman is called, he is called the enemy of the Jews in Esther 9:10. And he is called the enemy of all the Jews in 9:24. Why? Because he devised against the Jews to destroy them. Hitler's final solution had nothing on his final solution. His final solution was to exterminate every Jew, and he was dead set on doing it. And in Revelation 12:13, you see that when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And in the context of Revelation 12, that man-child is Jesus Christ. And when the devil enters into the Antichrist, he knows that he's got but a short time, Revelation 12:12, and he goes after Israel with a vengeance, which is going to make Adolf Hitler look like a den mother. He'll have nothing on him. And he decides, I want to make this a spectacle. So he decides, how can we do this? And one of his advisors comes up and says, I know what you can do. You can build a gallows. Make it 50 cubits high. That's 75 feet tall. He makes this massive thing, and he's like, yeah, there's a movie out, I think a Western called Hang 'em High. That's what his plan was. He's going to hang him high. He's going to be way up there. He wants all the world to see this guy hanging from this gallows. But what happens? The very gallows that were built to hang Mordecai on, he ends up getting hung on himself. It comes back on his own head, just like Nabal. Haman, his name means magnificent. Nice, humble fellow. Number 17, we have into the New Testament, we have in Matthew chapter 2, Herod. Herod is the king in Rome. When he hears about the birth of a Jewish king, and the three wise guys show up, or the three wise men show up, and he hears about this Jewish king. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I want to come and worship with you. Here's what you do. Go and find out where this king is, and then bring me word again. I want to come and pay my respects too. Of course, that's not why he was asking this. He wanted to kill him. And later on, these guys get word by God says, hey, whatever you do, don't go back to Herod. So they kind of sneak out of town. They take off, head back to where they came from. But when he sees that, when Herod hears that these guys skipped town and never told him where this king was, they said, well, they must have found him, and then, man, they're conspiring against me. Here's what I'll do. Let's see. This was somewhere it was over there in Bethlehem. Here's what I'll do. I'll just, let's see. They said they saw that star about 2 years ago. I'll just kill every 2-year-old and under. That ought to get it. But about that time, God said, hey, you need to get out of town. You need to get out of town tonight. Get out. Get moving. Grab your stuff. Go now. And Joseph and Mary and Jesus, they head out of town. And I want to throw this in there because sometimes there's confusion in this, because there's several different Herods in the Bible. This is not the same Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. This is not the same guy, because you find him in 2:15. It says when they heard that Herod was dead, they went ahead and returned, and they went into Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, they returned to Nazareth, not Nebuchadnezzar. They returned to Nazareth. But it said they heard that this guy was dead. So this guy died early on. He died before the chapter is over. So this is a different guy than the guy that killed John the Baptist. And Herod's name means heroic, which killing a bunch of 2-year-olds doesn't sound very heroic to me, but that's just me. The last guy we come to is Judas. And you find in John 6:66. You find where it talks about a guy by the name of Judas. And Judas is one of the 12 apostles. In John 6:21, it says that Judas Iscariot, and in quotes, is a devil. Not is of the devil, not is full of the devil. He said is a devil. That's a key phrase there. In John 6:64, he's called the traitor. Jesus points him out as the traitor. In John 13:2, at the Last Supper, it says that the devil put in his heart to betray the Lord. And in John 17:12, Judas is called the son of perdition, which we've already heard, according to, where's that, 2 Thessalonians 2:8, I believe it is. That's one of the names of the Antichrist. The son of perdition. You know what perdition means? Damnation. He is the son of damnation. And that's a name that's only reserved for the Antichrist, which means that Judas not only is a type of the Antichrist, technically, I believe he is the Antichrist. He comes back out of the bottomless pit. He is called the son of perdition. I believe that he is the Antichrist and he's just going to be resurrected later on. But that's another story. Not that I could explain that any better, because you don't have a lot of information on it. But here's what you got with old Judas. For 3.5 years, he's one of the 12 apostles. I mean, he eats with them, he sleeps with them, he's wherever they are, he's there. And you would think that the guy that is a devil and is filled with the devil would stand out. You know, maybe he got little horns poking out, he's got a little red pitchfork, maybe a red suit. Something would give him away. But do you remember when he said, one of you is going to betray me? You find 3 answers there. 10 of the apostles said, Lord, is it I? That you would have thought they would have said, well, obviously, it's Judas over here. He's the Antichrist. It's him. No, they all said, Lord, it's going to be me, isn't it? I know it's me. I'm the one. I'm the traitor. I'm the betrayer. It's going to be me. I know it's going to be me. 10 of them said that. They all said, Lord, is it I? 10 of them. John the apostle, he said, who is it, Lord? It's not going to be me. Who is it? But then there's one other answer that came up. He didn't say, Lord, is it I? He said, Master, is it I? Now, that's subtle, isn't it? Because he refused to call him Lord. He never calls him Lord. You go back and look. He said, Master, Master. And he kissed him. And he said, Judas, are you going to betray the Son of Man with a kiss? He didn't say Lord. He said Master. It's different, isn't it? So for 3.5 years, he's doing all this stuff, and you would think that he would be the guy that looks angry and is unchristlike, but he's not. He was able to play it off. He was able to pull off such a counterfeit that 11 disciples didn't know who this guy was. Because even though John said it's not going to be me, he didn't say it's obviously going to be Judas. He didn't know who it was. He just knew it wasn't going to be him. So only the Lord knew that he was the traitor. And there's another thing here. When the miracles of healing go on, Judas is not a failure in that. You gotta pay attention to that stuff. That stuff's in there. Judas is another one that dies by hanging. Matthew 27:3, Acts 1:18. And he is also one of the 7 suicides in the Bible. And when he dies, as I said earlier, Acts 1:25 says that he went unto his own place. Judas means he shall be praised. Now that's the 18 types of the Antichrist, and I wanted to finish up with this. I didn't want to just leave you with just a bunch of information, walk out the door, because then you're like, well, how do you make this practical? How do you take this and apply this to my life practically and personally, and how can I take this and apply it to my life? Well, the Antichrist, as we can see, was a counterfeit. He was an imposter. He was a phony. And there's a book written at the tail end of the Dark Ages, 1420, by a Catholic bishop named Thomas A. Kempis. He wrote a book called The Imitation of Christ, which I thought was an interesting title. You can find more Bible in a phone book than you could in Mr. Kempis's book. But it revealed a problem that takes place when anybody loses the Bible. You start coming up with, when you don't have the mind of Christ, you come up with a worldly imitation of Jesus Christ rather than the real thing. Because an imitation is a counterfeit. An imitation is a phony knockoff. It's a phony. It's a knockoff. It's a cheap, watered down perversion of the real thing. But my Bible says over here in Philippians chapter 3, verse 17, and also in 2 Thessalonians 3:9, that we're not supposed to be an imitation of Christ. We're supposed to be a sample of Christ, not a cheap imitation. We're supposed to be the real thing. And the way you do that is you get real with God. You hide God's real words in your heart. You apply God's real doctrine and real commandments to your life. And it becomes real to you. Otherwise, you're just playing a game and you've got company with 18 men. Now, the last time I taught Bible study, we went over, like as I said, the 21 types of Christ. You know what those men were? They were a sample of Jesus Christ. This was a group of 21 men, and there's others, obviously, throughout the Bible. They were a sample of Jesus Christ. They're men that got God's heart. They are men that got God's mind. They're men that got God's wisdom. And they're men that followed God's ways to the letter. And when they did that, they became a sample of Jesus Christ. And these 18 men, they were an imitation of Jesus Christ. But they were also a sample. You know what they were a sample of? They were a sample of the man of sin. Well, that's all I got for you. I trust and pray that was a blessing. Let's have every head bowed and every eye closed. Lord, thank you for all you do for us. I pray that what was said would, Lord, ring some bells and help us, Lord, to look inside of our heart and ask ourselves, am I a sample of Jesus Christ tonight, or am I a cheap imitation? And this is not something that, it's not about what the world thinks of me. It's not about what any person thinks of me, Lord. It's about what you think of me. Do you think of me? Do you look inside my life and say, yes, you're a sample of my Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, or am I a cheap imitation? If I'm a cheap imitation, I ask and pray, if there's someone here that maybe is a cheap imitation of the real thing, that you would help them, Lord, to convict their hearts and help them to get things real in their life. Get the real Word of God applied in their heart and stop playing games. Stop messing around. Stop screwing around with the Word of God and playing games with God. Lord, help us, Lord, to be real with you, because you've always been real with us. Help us, Lord, to be real with you, and help us, Lord, to do that which is well-pleasing in your sight. For we ask all these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.